Good afternoon. So this presentation is reporting on a PhD study which looked into the impact of yoga for pregnancy on women's self-efficacy for labour and birth. So we're going to take a quick look at the background and proposition for the study and the methods and design, but I hope to spend more time on the findings and where we go from here. The background proposition, I'm sure you won't disagree with them, is that straightforward birth has benefits for women and their families and also is preferred by the majority of women. Also, the second proposition is that women who labour using their own resources tend to have more straightforward births. They tend to have less intervention. So if we can enable or teach women self-coping strategies that they can use in labour, then we should have more straightforward births. Also emerging research, that's a quote from Cochrane, is that yoga may reduce perceived pain in labour and reduce intervention. So it appears that there may be something that women are learning in yoga that is enabling them to manage their contractions, those sensations. And that makes sense, doesn't it, when we know that yoga, there's a lot of breathing, a lot of positions. I'm looking at Kathy here because she's telling me I should do a downward dog while I speak, and I'm just going to ignore her. Breathing, positions, movement, relaxation, things that we know help in labour. But what we don't know, we don't have the research for, is how yoga might help. Is it all of those things? Is it some of them? Is there something else? There's very little research into how yoga might work. So that was the basis for this study. And I aim to do that by looking firstly at yoga classes and the documenting the content, speaking to yoga teachers. And then I spoke to women pregnant women, before they started yoga, just before they had their babies when they'd been to yoga, and again postnatally. And then I put that all together with what we know about self-efficacy theory. Because there's an awful lot of research about self-efficacy and how you increase anyone's self-efficacy for anything, actually, whether it's learning to be a midwife or driving a car or learning a new language or children doing SATs. We know how to increase people's self-efficacy. What we don't do is apply that to antenatal education generally. So we tend to teach antenatal education how we always teach antenatal education. And my background, I'm not a midwife. I work for NCT, and so I'm an educationalist and a yoga teacher. So my background was saying, what is it? What is it in this education that seems to be or might work? How can we take what we know or what we feel might be happening in yoga, and is there any potential to take that out of yoga and put it into general antenatal education? How many of you do teach antenatal education or plan to? So quite a few of you. Okay. So the method and design. This is a grounded theory study, so very much taking women's stories, their experience, and a qualitative exploration with the principles of listening to women, lots of the things that we've heard about today, listening to women, trusting them, believing them, and accurately reporting what they say in their words as far as possible. So you'll see the women's words throughout. It was in 2 parts. And part 1 is actually, I've already reported on that in 2016. That's when I looked at yoga classes and spoke to yoga teachers. And I'll briefly summarise that before looking at part 2, which is what I really wanted to talk about today, which is the women's experience of yoga. I spoke to 22 women before they started yoga. I was going to speak to 12 after they attended yoga, but one of them had her baby early, and so I only spoke to 11. But I did speak to those 12 women, and I followed the women all the way through, which is quite nice, getting to know them over that period of time. So summarising the part 1 findings briefly, that's when I observed yoga classes and spoke to teachers. And one of the first things that was really interesting out of that was the aims, what the yoga teachers said with their aims. And they explicitly aimed to enhance women's self-efficacy and increase the number of positive births. And those of you who are teaching antenatal education already, I think there are so many demands on that really precious time. We're not always explicitly aiming to increase positive births. So that's just, one thing that was really perhaps different about yoga is that they said, yeah, we want to help women have easier labours, and we're going to plan the classes to enable that. Whereas there tends to be a focus now on, we have to include knowledge, parenting, self-efficacy. All of these things are really important, but not so strong in yoga. There were 3 sub-themes that came through from the class observation, and the first one was that the teachers taught an awful lot of techniques, a lot of breathing, and I've been speaking to some of you today who've said, oh yeah, of course, it's all about the breathing, and that's what the teachers did. They taught counting breaths, they taught slowing breath, they taught visualizing a golden thread, lots and lots of breathing, lots of movement, lots of teaching of swaying hips and figures of 8. Another interesting thing, I think, for those of you who teach antenatal education already, is that there's a mix of first, second, third, fourth time mothers in the classes. So they were creating this sisterhood where the women were learning from each other. The second and third time mothers were teaching the first time mothers. And I think we tend to not have that so much generally, where we now offer antenatal education more for first timers. The teachers also aim to build the women's confidence by continually saying, actually, you can do this. This is possible. So, moving to part 2, which was interviewing the women. This is their first interviews, 22 women, before they started yoga. And what was reassuring about this is that findings very much echoed other research that's been recently published about, and you'll know this as midwives, that women want to look after themselves, but that's so that they look after their baby. They know if they're calmer, if they're fitter, if their labour is nicer, that will help them and their families. It'll help their baby if they're calmer. It'll help them postnatally if they have a nice labour. So again, 3 sub-themes. And the first one was women hoping for a natural labour and to learn the techniques to enable them to have this natural labour. That's what they were going to yoga for. Yeah, all of them were wanting either a natural or easier labour. The second sub-theme was really interesting because not one of these 22 women was confident in either her ability to manage labour or that something wouldn't go wrong. So every single one of those women qualified either in the same sentence or the next sentence with, yeah, I'd really like a natural labour, but I know it's not going to happen. But I'm being really realistic. I know, I probably have to have something. All my friends, it hasn't gone the way they wanted. So they very much felt that they were trying to prepare for something that it was impossible to prepare for.
It just puts women in a very, very difficult situation at times because obviously we haven't got the medical maybe insight, and also because you are in such a vulnerable situation, you might actually consent to something that your heart isn't maybe 100% in, and actually in retrospect you would maybe have chosen to do it differently. But of course there is no kind of second time around, if you like. I mean, it's quite final, giving birth.
And I put that quote in because I think sometimes we have this image, don't we, of women going in saying, I want to have a natural birth, and that they're very gung-ho or very positive about that. But every one of those 20 women, there was a real depth, a real subtlety, and that fear and vulnerability underneath for every one of them. So none of them felt confident or was determined. The third sub-theme that came through in the first interviews, I think followed on from the first two, in that they really wanted to have a nice, easy labour, but they thought it probably wasn't going to happen. So they were going to use the yoga techniques then to try and stay calm even if everything went wrong, because they knew that even if they didn't get the birth they hoped for, if they could stay calm, then they'd be less traumatised afterwards. So that's what they were using the yoga for. So really interesting first interviews, quite a set of thoughtful and vulnerable women with hopes, which is, I think, probably what you'd expect. So then I waited until they'd attended yoga classes and they were just a week or two before their birth, and spoke to them again. And the main theme that came through here was gaining confidence. They were a lot more confident, a lot more positive. They felt a lot more in tune with their body. And I spoke to them about why they felt they were more confident. And the first one, very much teaching the positions, teaching the breathing. So they were gaining confidence because they'd practiced so much. They really felt that they had tools in their toolkit that they could use in their labour. And again, what was interesting, we know as midwives and educators that coping techniques, one size doesn't fit all, does it? Those of us who cope by turning inwards need to turn inwards in labour, and those of us who cope by counting or cope by pacing up and down need to pace up and down or count. So what the women were finding at this stage is because they'd learned so many different techniques, they were able to pick out the ones that would work for them. So they'd say, oh yeah, we did some kind of visualising, but that's not going to work for me. But I think we looked at dialing down the pain, and I think that'll work. So they're really beginning to identify, and that was giving them confidence. The other thing that was giving them confidence was this element of women coming back with their babies and telling positive stories. And I know lots of mixed feelings about one born every minute, and the stories that women are hearing nowadays. But in the yoga class, they were getting a constant stream of women coming back and going, oh yeah, it's fine, I did this and it worked. And those were putting together to make the third sub-theme is that they felt very much more in control. They felt more empowered, that labour wasn't something that was going to happen to them, but that they could play an active part in. They were beginning to make choices. Someone came in last week and she had a water birth, so I thought, I'm going to have a water birth too. They were actively contributing, taking control. So then I waited again for these women to have their babies and spoke to them after their births. And a very strong theme of having a positive labour experience from these 12 women. And this is a qualitative study. It really doesn't aim to prove causation. But it is notable that all 12 of those women gave birth vaginally. All 12 of them laboured, certainly through first stage, with no pain relief, except some had Entonox. One woman asked for an epidural after 2 hours of pushing, and her birth was aided with forceps. But the vast majority of these women had really lovely labours, and even that woman felt very positive about her labour. And I'd like you to just take a note of the word calm there, because we'll come back to it. So, again, 3 sub-themes. Very similar. There's a really nice synergy between what happened all the way through these interviews. The first thing every single woman said was, it was the breathing. It was the positions. It was the figures of 8 that I learned. I just knelt on the bed and did what I did in yoga, and it worked. So very strong theme of the techniques that they had learned were how the women attributed their positive labours. I think there's a quote on the next thing which showed how they qualified that with the second half of the sentence.
Learning about breathing and doing the different exercises helped, and also hearing other people's positive birth stories, because then it wasn't all about everyone who wants to line up and tell you their horrific kind of tales of destruction from pregnancy. Because I think that just sort of calmed me down a bit, really.
I love that, their tales of destruction. So they went straight from, it was the breathing that really helped, or the positions that really helped, but it also helped knowing that other women had done it before me, and these stories. The other thing they said here was that comment earlier about, I saw that woman and she did this, and so at that point I thought, I'll go and do that too. So lots of positive things about the stories. I come back to the word calm here. This is 4 different women. There's as many as I could fit on the slide. There was a real sense from all of the women of how calm they were through their labour. I love that 3rd one. I was ridiculously calm through my labour. And the 4th one, I felt really, really calm. Actually, it was amazing. I was completely at peace. I think being relaxed then allowed it all to progress really nicely. And again, that's something that 1 or 2 of you have said to me today at tea. Well, if she's relaxed, then, everything's going to go nicely. So there was a real sense for these women of remaining calm. At this point, so we have these lovely themes that are coming through nice and strong. What are they learning in yoga that seems to help? Well, the breathing, the positions, the movement, hearing stories and remaining calm. So then we link that to what we know about self-efficacy. What do we know about how to increase anyone's self-efficacy they're learning at anything? Well, this is what you'll find in all the research, that ways to increase self-efficacy are performance accomplishment, vicarious experience, verbal persuasion, and somatic awareness. And we can put that into more everyday language. It just means practicing, really. And when you're learning to be a midwife, when you practice, you gain self-efficacy. Similarly, when you hear of stories or you watch other people, it increases your self-efficacy. Of course, we learn more when we're being encouraged rather than discouraged. And of course, we learn more. We know that we learn more when our adrenaline levels are low and we're calm. So putting those two together with what we know about ways to increase self-efficacy and what the women said helped, very, very similar. The women said practicing breathing and techniques and positions helped them. This hearing positive stories helped them. And being able to stay calm helped them. So there's a lot of synergy again between what we almost would expect from what we know about antenatal. If we had to predict what would work for antenatal education to help people manage their labour, that's actually what the women said did work. So going on to the grounded theory at the end of this study, if we had to say, answer that question of how do we think yoga works? Well, we think it works. From this study, what this study shows is the women think it works from all the techniques, the breathing, the positions, the movement, there's positive stories from peers, and being able to remain calm. And that sense of confidence from what all of that enables them to use more of their techniques and keep going with them for longer. And that helped them stay calm and have the labours they wanted. And I suppose the thing that I would finish on then is where do we go from here? And that's, with any research, there's always it brings up more questions sometimes. And I suppose my question that I'd like to leave you with is, do you think that would work? Do you think that would work not just in yoga. Is it possible that if we could spend more time with women, helping them with breathing techniques, helping them actually practice the techniques that would work and be effective for them in labour, that they might actually be able to manage their labour better, that sensation, that pain of contractions when they go through their birth. That's just one final quote. This woman is somebody from the classes, so I'm very fond of Natalie, who's let me take photos of her. I finished early, so I'm really happy to either take you through a breathing technique or take questions or let you go for tea.